Yeah. Well, good afternoon, or should I say again, good evening to everyone that's out there in television, radio, internet, wherever you are land. Good evening and welcome to Block Sports. This is Michael Jefferson coming to you here today, and I'm looking to talk to you about the scores of the games that have already been played by your favorite HBCU school, or talk about the upcoming games that are coming up, either in the in the 7 o'clock hour Eastern Standard Time, 6 o'clock Central Standard Time. And also, there might be some games that are even coming up even later, but not that many. I can tell you that right now. But instead of prolonging the agony for some of you and to allow some of you to just start jumping up and down right away, let's go ahead and get to the fun. And as we take a look here, let's go ahead and get to the scoreboard. As you can see, we're going to start off first by looking at the independents. And as far as the independents goes, again, these are schools that are HBCUs, but are not necessarily associated with an HBCU conference. And right now we have Hampton taking on the Delaware Blue Hens. And as you can see in the first quarter, they're trailing by a score of 7-0. In the first quarter, and these scores are coming to you by way of the YourStreet.tv scoreboard, HBCU scoreboard. So if you're trying to find out the latest and greatest of these scoreboards, there are two scoreboards that I do recommend that you go and check out. One happens to be the scoreboard for YourStreet.tv. That's at www.yourstreet.tv. And you can, at the very front of the page, you will see a banner that says HBCU scores. And just click on that link and it'll put you right here where you are seeing the scores right now. And another place that we do frequent is the Onnidan Group. And that's at onnidan.com. And that's ONNIDAN. And that's the only other place that I'd recommend you to go to if you do not come to YourStreet.tv to get the latest and greatest HBCU sports. I have been associated and knowing Mr. Eric Moore for quite some time. He also was is a very good friend of my uncle, Mr. Sam Jefferson, and who was sports information director for Jackson State University. And that's the only other reason why I will frequent the Onnidan Group's webpage. Because he's a very close friend to the family. But enough being said, let's go ahead and take a look at the rest of these scores here. And as I said, the Hampton Pirates, they're trailing the Delaware Blue Hens by a score of 7-0. You have the Bulldogs of South Carolina State. They're taking on the Aggies of North Carolina A&T. They have not been faring too well against us HBCUs lately since they decided to vacate and leave the MEAC conference. So you know what? I have a saying, and I've told a couple of people this saying, and my saying is this. You always go to, and this is part of it, this is where it comes from. A lot of people always leave because they think the grass is always greener on the other side. My saying to that is, the grass ain't greener, it's still grass. So when you think you're just going to the other side, all because you think the grass is greener on the other side, it's just grass. There's no difference. You might think it's different. You might think it tastes better, it looks better, it is better, but it's not better. It's just grass. And A&T, they did fare pretty well their first couple of years, But now, hey, now they see their HBCU counterparts. They're kind of beating up on them, and I hope South Carolina State continues to beat up on them tonight. So, and with that being said, as I said, let's continue on. And as you can see, as I said, South Carolina State, they are still beating up on the game is tied, but hopefully they beat up on the Aggies later on tonight. And also Fort Valley State, they defeated the Bluefield State Hens by a score. I'm sorry. Let's make sure I get this. Bluefield State Big Blues by a score of 44-27. And I'm sorry, I was thinking about the University of Delaware Blue Hens instead of the Big Blues. So I apologize to you about that. But that's it for the few that I have for the independents. And let's go ahead and move up to the CIAA and the SIAC. But let's take the SIAC first. The Benedict Tigers. And let me say this real quick. Myself and one other of my counterparts, we were talking about the Benedict Tigers, and we were saying that we can see the Tigers doing wonderful things this year along the way. As I've said several times on the show, I had the opportunity to see Benedict last year play here in Indianapolis, and I was very impressed. Unfortunately, they lost that game to the very team that they're playing now, the Kentucky Thoroughbreds. And they lost that game in Indianapolis in the second half, because the second half, the Thoroughbreds of Kentucky, they came on, and they came on hard. That running game was so hard to contain, but of course they had Coach Jackson that was coaching the team during that time, and he had a game plan. He followed through with that game plan, and it went through rather well. And the one thing I can say is when in the second half of that game, it was a great second half plan. Great second half plan for what they did. But this year will be a little different, if I'm not mistaken, because something else I can easily say about Benedict, they're playing pretty good defense, really good offensive game. And I just don't see anyone in the SIAC defeating them this year. And I might be wrong. I have been wrong before, very few times. But but I have been wrong before. But all I have to say is that Benedict has put together a very, very good team this year. And as you can see by the score, they're leading Kentucky State 14-7 in the second quarter. We will see whether or not Benedict can hold on to that lead in the second quarter like they did last year. Now, last year, they gave up that lead, and they lost to Kentucky State. So we will keep a close eye on that game and see where it goes. As we continue on, we see Albany State is playing Clark Atlanta, and that game is in the first quarter. And hopefully we will see some activity in that game during the show. But as this continues on, I can tell you one thing, that we will not see the end of that game. We won't see the end of any of the games that started late. So that's one thing I can say. But I would say stay tuned and keep your eyes close. I would be okay. Keep your eyes close to yourstreet.tv as the scores are updated. That way you'll see who wins, who's losing, and who has a close game. And as we continue on, we see that Tuskegee, they defeated Allen by a score of 35-27. We also see Savannah State finally pulled one out, defeating Morehouse by a score of 15-3. And of course, as you also saw, Fort Valley State defeated The Big Blues of Bluefield, because Fort Valley State is in the SIAC, and the Bluefield, they are a part of the Independents in another division. And of course, Miles College defeated Central State by a score of 34-14. And as I said, these scores are coming to you by way of YourStreet.tv and the YourStreet.tv HBCU scoreboard. Now let's move on to the CIAA. And as you can see with the CIAA, you have Shawan and Winston-Salem. They are tied. Neither team has found the end zone or the uprights via touchdown or field goal, and that score is currently 0-0. You have Virginia State Trojans just pouring it on. They defeated Livingstone by a score of 37-7. And you also have here, Shaw defeating Elizabeth City by a score of 35-16. I've always said, and I'm going to repeat, I see Shaw giving Fort Valley State a run for their money for that division. But we're going to talk about that a little bit more when we take a look at the standings for each division, for each conference. But I still say Shaw stands a very, very good chance of possibly being the team to upset Fort Valley State and playing in the CIAA championship game. Who they play may surprise you, because Bowie State, they have a challenge. Bowie State has a challenge this year, and we will see whether or not Bowie State can fight through that challenge and make it back to the championship with the new coach. But that's why they play the game. So let's continue on with the scores for the CIAA. And as I said, and as we continue to move the scores on down, you have Bowie State. And as I was talking about earlier, Bowie State defeated St. Augustine's Falcons by a score of 36-6. So congratulations to Bowie State for getting on the winning track. And you'll see what their record is as we go to the conference standings later on. And we have Bowie State, as I said, defeating St. Augustine by a score of 36-20. Next, we have Lincoln defeating Johnson C. Smith, which was a barn burner, and they defeated them by a score of 29-28. And as I said, just to see Bowie State get on the winning track again on this occasion, they have a tough road ahead of them this year to repeat as champions for the fourth straight year. And that's the same thing about Fort Valley State with their battle with Shaw, because that battle with Shaw, Fort Valley State has been to the championship 4 straight years. Unfortunately, they've come up empty, just like the Minnesota Vikings and the Buffalo Bills in the NFL. Made it to the championship game 4 times, and all 4 times they came up empty. And hopefully they will have success at least somewhere along the line, that is for Fort Valley State. But Shaw, they're knocking at the door. They were knocking at the door last year. There's a lot of games yet to be played. But guys, I'm just saying, pay attention. Pay attention. Pay attention to what Shaw may bring to the table this year. Because those Bears, they're not hibernating anymore. So with all of that being said, we shall see what they bring to the table. And now let's go ahead and take a look at the MEAC and the SWAC conference and see what happened in those games here. Now, let's take the MEAC first. And as you can see, North Carolina Central is just continuing to just blitz the field. Now they're defeating University of Virginia Lynchburg by a score of 28-0 at halftime. They're just saying, not on my watch. I'm done playing. End of the discussion. The big game, as far as I'm concerned, is with the MEAC. That game is going to take place on October 22nd. And that will be in South Carolina, at South Carolina State, between North Carolina Central and the Bulldogs of South Carolina State. So North Carolina Central travels to South Carolina State. As far as I'm concerned, that will probably be for the championship. Now, I'm quite sure Delaware State, yes, surprisingly, Delaware State will probably have something to say with that, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself because no conference games have been played as of yet in the MEAC. Those conference games will be played within the next will start within the next couple of weeks. But yes, I know I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but based on the way these teams are playing right now, I just don't see, well, and then again, South Carolina State last year, they were 1-4 before the season started. And when I say before the season started, before conference play started. And if I'm not mistaken, I think they were 1-4. And then they ran the table. So we'll see whether or not some team all of a sudden gets hot and start blowing everyone away. But we shall see, because that's why they play the game. But let's continue on with the scores from the MEAC conference. And let's go here. Ooh, did not want to do that. Let's try this again. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Now, as we continue on, as I said, South Carolina State, they're currently playing the Aggies of North Carolina A&T, and it'll be interesting to see what happens in that game, whether or not South Carolina State can hold on, even though there is not a score in that game, but can pull that game out and win another one for the MEAC. And as we continue on, we see Norfolk State, and they are really having a tough time under Coach Odoms. And the question is whether or not Coach Odoms is going to have a successful sophomore season this year. Right now, he's truly taking it on the chin. He and his Spartans are really having a hard going of it. And as you can see, they lost to St. Francis by a score of 45-26. Next, we have Delaware State, and we were just talking about Delaware State a few seconds ago, and they lost to the Warriors. And I hope I pronounced this school's name correctly. Merrimack. I'm sorry, Merrimack. They lost to the Merrimack Warriors by a score of 26-13 for Delaware State. And hopefully Delaware State will be a little bit more successful in their play as well. And now let's roll over to the SWAC Conference. And as far as the SWAC Conference goes, as you can see, Texas Southern, who had a huge win last week by defeating Southern University in Southern. And that's a hard place to beat anybody. But Texas Southern defeated Southern last week. And this week we're expecting a lot of things, and that was their first win last week. But when we're kind of expecting a lot of big things from Texas Southern. And the one thing I said last year, there are no easy wins in the SWAC. Nowhere. A lot of people will look at the schedule, and you'll see the score from Mississippi Valley and Jackson State. But still, there are no easy wins. No easy wins anywhere across the board in the SWAC. And as we continue on, as I said, you can see in the third quarter, University of Texas in San Antonio, the Roadrunners are defeating Texas Southern by a score of 52-24. Prairie View is leading Alabama State by a score of 14-6 at halftime. And as we continue down the line, we also see that Alabama A&M, and the Rattlers of Florida A&M, they are currently tied in the first quarter by a score of 0-0. And you also have the Golden Lions of UAPB, and that's the University of Arkansas Pine Bluff. They're currently 0-0 with the Braves of Alcorn State. And that game is still in the first quarter. And also you have the game that Jackson State played against Mississippi Valley State. And that game was, as you can see, that score was 49-7. That game was close in the first half. The first half score, Jackson State scored late in the first half, which made the score 21-7. But after that, as you can see by the score, Jackson State had their way in the second half, defeating the Delta Devils by a score of 49-7. After the first half, going into the second half, the Devils were never in the game. And a lot of people would like to say, yes, we would like to make sure that the Devils are not in our game either, but that's another story. And also Grambling, who led this game in the first half, especially Grambling pretty much had control, but all of a sudden the Wildcats of Bethune-Cookman came back, took control of the game, and the Tigers of Grambling never scored another point. And as you can see, they defeated, the Wildcats defeated the Grambling State Tigers by a score of 36-19. And I thought that Coach Hugh Jackson would get a victory today in the SWAC, because that game for Bethune-Cookman is counted as a SWAC game. When Jackson State played Grambling last week, that game did not count as a SWAC game. There are certain games that when they play each other, depending on how it falls on their schedule and depending on what year, some of those games will count as SWAC games. But this game, but the game last week that Jackson State played, that was considered a non-conference game. Excuse me. But the game that Bethune-Cookman played today against Grambling, for those teams, this is a conference game. And I can say congratulations to Bethune-Cookman for winning their first conference game of the year. So congratulations to Bethune-Cookman for defeating Grambling. I'm quite sure Grambling did not want to see that happen, because right now, and even though I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but Coach Hugh Jackson is looking for his first victory, his first conference victory in the SWAC. He has won one game in football and during the college football season, but he has not won a SWAC game just yet. Since this is his first conference game of the year, we'll see how he fares in the other games. But let's continue to move on as we take a look at, and I believe we have just one more score after that, and if I'm not mistaken. And as I said, there is one more game that's going to be played later on today, and that game is going to be between Alabama State and Prairie View, and that game is going to be at Alabama State. And we will see how well Alabama State fares later on today. And let's see whether or not there are any scores that I may have missed along the way, because there's a possibility that there could have been some games that were played that I may have missed. And I do want to see, as well as find out whether or not there are any additional scores that may have taken place that I may have missed. You mentioned that Tuskegee defeated Allen by a score of 35-27. Fort Valley State was on the road when they defeated Bluefield State. Miles College, of course, defeated Central State. Shaw, that game is a final. They defeated Elizabeth City by a score of 35-16. Lane College defeated Edward Waters by a score of 20-9. So that is one of those games that we did not get a chance to report on. So congratulations to Lane College defeating the Edward Waters by a score of 20-9. Lincoln out of Missouri lost to Northeastern State by a score of 38-10. And we'll see whether or not Lincoln can get back on their winning ways. And Texas College lost to Wayland Baptist by a score of 65-31. And let's see if there are any other scores that we may have missed here. Of course, University of Texas, San Antonio, UTSA and that game is final now. They defeated Texas Southern by a score of 52-24. That game was in San Antonio, Texas. And Virginia Union, that's another team that we have to stay on the lookout for. Virginia Union. And that team is leading, I repeat, leading Fort Valley State by a score of 31-21. That can be huge because right now Fort Valley State is one of the very few HBCUs in Division II to defeat Valdosta State. And Valdosta State has essentially had their way with HBCU powerhouses in Division II. However, this year, Virginia Union took it to Valdosta State. Now, Valdosta State has played other HBCU schools in Division II, and they have defeated them. But Virginia Union is the only school to be successful in beating and defeating Valdosta State. So congratulations to Virginia Union. And as I said, this score is in the fourth quarter as Virginia Union is leading Fort Valley State by a score of 31-21. So very interesting, and we're going to pay close attention to see whether or not they can continue to hold on to that score. Virginia State, of course, defeated Livingstone by a score of 37-7. North Carolina Central, we have an update on that score. North Carolina Central is leading Virginia Lynchburg by a score of 59-7. So they're just continuing to pour it on. They're not holding any of their guns back. They're just letting all things go blazing into the wind. And much success to them as they continue to roll on. And, of course, we have Prairie View leading Alabama State. And that's at halftime by a score of 14-6. Pine Bluff is losing to Alcorn by a score of 7-0 in Alcorn. And that game is in the first quarter. Let's see some of the other scores. And right now we on okay, and we have Alabama A&M with the lead over Florida A&M. That score is 10-7. So Alabama A&M, and that game is in the second quarter, and Alabama A&M is leading. As I said, they're leading Florida A&M by a score of 10-7. And one more game that we have that we talked about, South Carolina State. They are leading North Carolina A&T, and this game is also in the first quarter, but they are leading North Carolina A&T by a score of 7-0 in the first quarter. And we will see whether or not South Carolina State will continue to hold on. And you know what? I haven't had a show after all the games have been played. And I think I will do that this upcoming Monday evening. And we'll take a look at all the scores through all of the conferences, and take a look at the standings of each one and see what the crystal ball has to say about what the prognosticators stated earlier on during the year. But as I said, in the MEAC, no games have been played as of yet. But let's take a look currently at what the scores are, at what the standings are so far. Let's make sure I get this pulled up for you so we can take a look at it on your screen. And as soon as I get this up, I'll make sure I bring it to you. And here we are. And even though some of the games may be final or may be coming up final, but this has been updated as of about 30 minutes ago. So some of the games may have been final, may be finals now, but this will be updated as of later on. But as you can see, Virginia Union, they're 3-0. And they're leading the division. They're leading the conference, as a matter of fact, the only undefeated team in the CIAA. And not only are they leading in terms of conference play, but they're also leading in terms of their division, even though they're tied with Virginia State, Chowan, and Elizabeth City. Now, as far as Elizabeth City goes, they, if I'm not mistaken, Elizabeth City actually lost today. And let me take a quick look. As I confirm, yes, Elizabeth City actually lost to Shaw. So that game should be final. And so that means Elizabeth City, and that game may have not been considered a conference game that goes in the conference standings, but I can easily say that Elizabeth City did lose today to Shaw. And Shaw is currently 1-0 in the division, in the Southern Division, and they are tied in first place with Fort Valley State. And Fort Valley State is getting blitzed by Virginia Union. And, well, I should say they're losing by 10 points. I don't see Fort Valley State coming back in that game. I'm sorry, because I can see the type of game that Virginia Union is playing, and they're not playing to lose any games. So I would say that game is pretty much over. I don't care how much time is left in the game. I just don't see Virginia Union losing a game. And as we continue on with the current standings, you have Chowan 1-2, but they're 1-0 in conference in division play, along with Elizabeth City, and then you have Lincoln and Bowie State bringing it up the rear at 1-1 each. But Bowie State and Lincoln are 2-2 overall. Whereas in the Southern Division, you have St. Augustine's, Winston-Salem, and Johnson C. Smith still looking for their first victory of any type. Currently winless, with St. Augustine's coming in at 0-4, where Winston-Salem and Johnson C. Smith are currently 0-3. Now let's move to the SIAC. And as far as the SIAC goes, Benedict. Let the drum roll for the Benedict Tigers. I think they are the team to beat, along with Albany State. Whenever they play, that will be for, as far as I'm concerned, for the conference. Call me crazy, but I just don't see anyone. I don't see anyone in the West surprising either one of those teams. It's either going to be Benedict or Albany State to win the conference. And of course, I will eventually put my money probably on Albany State. But I just don't see anyone else outside of Albany State or Benedict doing anything at all in conference play. Miles College, as you can see, they're 1-0. Tuskegee is 1-0, and also Lane College, they're 1-0. And a lot of individuals have said that Lane College has a pretty decent team this year. Great. I just don't see you winning the conference championship. I'm sorry. Someone else may say differently. I just don't see it. But I know, just like I've said, and I've said it already today, hence the reason why that's why they play the game. But let them play the game. I just still don't see it. But that's another story. And but we shall see. But as I said, as you can see, as far as the West goes, you have Kentucky State and Central State bringing up the rear. Kentucky State hasn't won a game as of yet in conference play, nor overall. They're 0-3, whereas Central State, they've won one game, but of course they've only played one game in conference play, and they are currently 0-1. Now going back up to the East, you have Fort Valley State that's also tied for first place, and they are also undefeated. They also won today as well. And let me see if I can pull that up real quick just to see what the score of that game was. And Albany State, they do play, well, they played earlier today, but I don't have a score for them. I'm quite surprised about that. From neither place. Need to go and check out to see where I can find scores for that game. There it is in the second quarter. Albany State is leading Clark Atlanta by a score of 10-0. So I do have an update on that game, and also Benedict is leading Kentucky State by a score of 14-7. So I do have some movement there finally. So sorry about that. But in terms of what's going on in some of the other games, I can see Fort Valley State. They defeated Bluefield State by a score of 44-27. And as I said, I can see Fort Valley State winning until they play Benedict and Albany State. After they play those two, I can see possibly Clark Atlanta giving them a challenge. But outside of that, don't see it. Just don't see it. I may be wrong. Haven't been wrong too many times. But we shall see the outcome of those games. But this is what it looks like in the SIAC. Moving to the MEAC. And as we take a look at the MEAC, here, let's go to the MEAC. As you can see, North Carolina Central, they will move to 4-0 after their victory today. And let me make sure and see whether or not that game is over. They're in the fourth quarter, and that score, of course, they're still at 59-7. Let me make sure that that game is over. No, they're still in the fourth quarter. And as I said, that score is 59-7 over Virginia Lynchburg. So they will move to 4-0. The only team that's undefeated in the MEAC. And as I said earlier, no team has played a conference game as of yet. We also have only two other teams that have, I guess you could say, a winning record. That being South Carolina State and Delaware State. And Delaware State, as you can see, is 2-2. South Carolina State is 1-1. South Carolina State, they're still playing right now. And they're currently leading North Carolina A&T by a score of 7-0. Whereas Delaware State, that game is final. And they lost to Merrimack by a score of 26-13. And I believe that may be an updated record for them, being 2-2 for Delaware State. But as far as everyone else, you see Morgan State at 1-2, Howard at 1-3, and Norfolk State 0-3, having lost earlier today. And with that comes challenges, because Norfolk State with Coach Odoms looked very promising for Coach Odoms, and I'm going to have to do some digging to find out why Norfolk State is not playing as well as we thought that they would be playing in Coach Odoms' sophomore season. He decided to come back home, coach Norfolk State, and come back home to North Carolina, and we were hoping to see him do exceptionally well with North Carolina State. I mean, with Norfolk State. But so far, he has not had any success. And Coach Damon Wilson over at Morgan State, he's 1-2. It'll be interesting to see how well he does this year, because he said as long as there's a conference title, conference championship, or a championship at the end of the rainbow, he plans on being there with his team. So we'll see how well that goes, and if he's successful enough to take his team to the Celebration Bowl. But I'm quite sure North Carolina Central and South Carolina State will have just a little debate over that conversation. But we have some good characters, good coaches in the MEAC, and it's going to be some great ball. That's all I have to say. But we also have pretty decent coaches in the SWAC conference as well. And let's take a look at the SWAC conference standing. And you see on top of the heap is Jackson State University. And they had a great victory today against Mississippi Valley State. And you can see that Jackson State is 2-0 in conference play. And you have them being overall 4-0. And currently they are the only team that's undefeated in the conference. And they are one of 3 teams that has a winning record, that have a winning record. You have Jackson State in the East along with Alabama State with the winning record. And you also have Arkansas Pine Bluff, surprisingly, with a winning record in the SWAC. And as far as UAPB goes, they are losing by a score of 7-0 to Alcorn currently, and that game is still in the first quarter. Let's see if there's an update to that score. And yes, there is an update to that score. Alcorn and Pine Bluff, they are tied. So UAPB and Alcorn, they're tied. And that is surprising. Even though Pine Bluff did win the West in the summer, or should I say, in the spring games of 2021. And even though they played fall, a traditional football schedule, but Pine Bluff, they actually were the team to win in the spring. And it'll be interesting to see whether or not they are able to pull off another win or another conference, should I say division title, and play for the SWAC championship game this year for fall 22. That'll be great to see them, because last year they had a horrendous time of playing. And it'll be good to see UAPB, because that's my mom's school. That's where my mom graduated from. It'll be good to see them have a successful football season. And but we'll see, because there's, like I said, there's a lot of football still to play. But right now, Pine Bluff, they're tied with Alcorn, and that is still in the first quarter, and that score is 7-all tie between Alcorn and Pine Bluff. And as we continue to matriculate through the East, Bethune-Cookman had a victory today against Grambling. And after Grambling had and I can't remember what the score was, but Grambling had a 19, I remember 19-16, and 19-17, I'm sorry. After that, they never looked back. And Bethune-Cookman took that game from Grambling, and the final score was 36-19. So they never quit going. They never stopped scoring. And I talked to the coach from Bethune-Cookman, and the one thing he said was that not only was he disappointed, but the players were also disappointed in their first year in the SWAC conference. Florida A&M had a very successful run for their first year in the SWAC conference, only losing one game and qualifying to go to the the FCS playoffs. Jackson State qualified to go to the Celebration Bowl with the better record, but Florida A&M qualified to go to the FCS playoffs. Bethune-Cookman had a losing season, And the coach expressed his sorrow, and he apologized for not having a good season. And he said they were planning on rectifying that. And even though they're 1-2 this year, but they've won their first conference game against Grambling. And as you can see in the West, Grambling is 1-3, 0-1 in conference play, of course, having lost to Bethune-Cookman. And as far as everyone else, you have Alabama State at 2-1, and Alabama State currently is behind Prairie View by a score of 14-6, and we'll see whether or not that will hold up, whether or not that score holds up the rest of the way, because Alabama State has been playing pretty good ball all year long, but yet and still, now they come up against Prairie View, and with Prairie View is 1-0 in conference play in the West Division, and they're 1-2 overall, not having a winning season, because the only team with a winning record in the West happens to be Pine Bluff. And of course, Texas Southern, they're 1-1 in conference play. And as far as Texas Southern goes, they lost to UTSA today by a score of 52-24. And not a conference game, but at least Texas Southern has gotten on the board with a win when they defeated Southern last week. And as you can see, Southern is 0-1, having lost to Texas Southern, and they are 1-2, and they are 1-2 with Alcorn, and Grambling State with a record of 1-3. And all four of those schools, including Pine Bluff, well, I guess you wouldn't say Pine Bluff and Alcorn, that doesn't count because they haven't played any games outside of the game that they're playing today against each other. But Southern and Grambling have not won a game in conference play as of yet, as well as Mississippi Valley and Florida A&M. Alabama State and Alabama A&M on the eastern side, they are yet to play a conference game, even though Alabama State and Prairie View, I need to find out whether or not that game is considered a SWAC game. If it is, then the winner of that will be 1-0, and the loser will be 0-1. But now you have it, folks, as we have taken a look at the current scores of all conferences, as well as the non-conference games that are non-conference teams that are out there. And it's been a very good weekend as far as football goes. And when we finally get into full conference play, that's when football season really begins. Yes, you have some teams that are out there that have already entered into conference play. Jackson State in the SWAC, they are already 2-0 in SWAC play, having defeated Mississippi Valley and also Florida A&M. So they're already 2-0 with only 4 more games yet to play. 3 games in their division. And if I'm not mistaken, 2 more games within still in conference play to be played, because they've already played Florida A&M and they've already defeated Mississippi Valley this week, and they are yet to play Bethune, Alabama State, and Alabama A&M. Those are the 3 remaining schools for Jackson State to play in the SWAC, and they have other schools. I know they will be playing Southern, Alcorn, and Texas Southern. Those are other games that they will be playing later on this year. I do not recall whether or not they will be playing University of Arkansas Pine Bluff. But for those games, those are Jackson State's other games that they'll be playing. And as I stated in the MEAC, they have not played any games in conference play as of yet. Those games will get kicked off for conference play for MEAC within the next 2 weeks. And that's going to be fun to see if North Carolina Central will continue to just mow through the competition, or will South Carolina State and Delaware State, and let me add in Morgan State, whether or not Morgan State will have anything to say about that. Howard with Coach Larry Scott Coach Scott, I'm going to say this. I got to say this. I understand we got some good coaches out there. Um, whether it's this year or next year, all I have to say is Howard, watch out for Howard. Watch out for Howard. I don't know if it's going to be this year or next year, but I will still say to everyone that's out there listening to me on this broadcast, I think Howard is a team to watch out for. If not this year, first off, I don't see Howard winning the MEAC this year. North Carolina Central is just looking too good this year. And I do plan to see if I can go to a North Carolina Central football game. And I need to check the schedule out to see what game I do want to attend. But I just don't see anyone defeating North Carolina Central this year outside of South Carolina State. So October 22nd will play a huge role into the winner of the MEAC conference. As I said, no team has played a conference game as of yet. As you look at the schedule right here, there have been no conference games played as of yet. Their first game will be in 2 weeks. And let me verify when they first, let's see, I want to give you the truth as far as conference play goes. And yes, as I look at the schedule, their first conference game will be played on October 8th. So in 2 weeks, that's when the MEAC start conference play. October 8th, the weekend of October 8th, will be their first conference games. And then we will see who will be the first. And guess who leads off? Morgan State against Norfolk State. South Carolina State, unfortunately, they will be playing Florida A&M. They will have very few games during that weekend. But then the following week, you have North Carolina Central playing Morgan State. So that'll let you know how well Morgan State is playing. And then the following week, that's when you have South Carolina. You will start having conference games from that point forward. But on the 22nd, as far as I'm concerned, that's when you have the two teams in the conference, North Carolina Central and South Carolina State. They will be playing head-to-head, and that game will be in South Carolina State, if I'm not mistaken. Let me verify that. Yes, that game will be in South Carolina State. Orangeburg, South Carolina, Oliver C. Dawson Stadium. If I'm not at Jackson State for their homecoming game, I will be at that game. I can tell you, I will be at that game. And we will have a pregame show for that particular game. And that game is scheduled to be a 1 o'clock? A 1:30 Eastern. Wow, 1:30. Why 1:30? Anyway, that will be a 1:30 start time. And either way, whether I will be in Jackson, Mississippi for Jackson State's homecoming game on October 22nd, or I will be in South Carolina for North Carolina Central and and also the game between South Carolina State and North Carolina Central. So we shall see. But also, as I was continuing on in terms of other teams that are in conference play, you still have the SIAC. They're in conference play, and no team has played no more than actually, Allen is the only team that has played 2 games, and as well as Savannah State. Savannah State is 1-1 in conference play, whereas Allen, they are, and we can take a look. Allen is 0-2 in conference play. And as far as the CIAA, you only have 4 schools that have played 2 games in conference play because football season has essentially just started. We're only 4 weeks into the season, and as you can see, unfortunately, St. Augustine's and Johnson C. Smith, even though they've played 2 games in conference play, they haven't won a game yet in conference play in their division. Whereas Bowie State and Lincoln, they are 1-1, 2-2 overall. Johnson C. Smith and Winston-Salem, Johnson C. Smith and St. Augustine, they're still looking for their first win, as well as Winston-Salem. And with all of that being said, I will let you know whether or not we're able to have a show on Monday evening discussing all of the scores that have taken place in HBCU land and how your favorite team fared this weekend. And with a look at all of the scores, with all of the updates for everything that has taken place, as we continue to give you updates on all of the scores, going back and seeing whether or not anyone has scored or if anyone is doing any better or worse for that matter. And so far I don't see it, or whether or not anyone is faring any better or worse. But I can say in the SWAC, Alabama A&M is leading Florida A&M by a score of 19-14, and that game is at halftime. And as I just said, Alabama A&M is leading Florida A&M, and that game happens to be in Tallahassee. That game is being hosted by Florida A&M, but that score right now, Florida A&M is trailing Alabama A&M by a score of 19-14, and that game is at halftime. The score for Alabama State, for UAPB and Alcorn, that game is still tied at 7-all. And as far as any other updates, that's it for the SWAC. MEAC. All of those scores still remain the same. No changes in those scores at all. Yep, no changes to those scores at all. Let's take a look at some of the other scores for you. Benedict is now leading Kentucky State by a score of 21-14, and that is for the SIAC. As I said, Benedict is currently leading Kentucky State by a score of 21-14. Morehouse is leading, which is a surprise, and there's a correction in the score. Morehouse actually defeated Savannah State, and that score was 15-3. That is a huge victory for Morehouse. Congratulations to the Morehouse Tigers. That is huge. Wow. Lets you know what Savannah State may not have this year. And I had someone else, one of my guests that I've had on the show before, that said Savannah State will not have the team that they once had. And it appears that he was right, because they just lost to Morehouse by a score of 15-3 as they travel over to Morehouse. So, wow, big victory for Morehouse. Lane, of course, as I discussed earlier, that game is a final. And that score was 20-9, Lane College winning that game. And I believe I stated this score, but let me state it anyway. Tuskegee defeated Allen by a score of 35-27. Wow, that Morehouse game kind of caught me by surprise. I have to admit that. And lastly, let's take a look and see whether or not there have been any updates to the CIAA. In the third quarter, Shawan is leading Winston-Salem by a score of 14-7. Game of the final. Virginia State defeated Livingstone by a score of 37-7. This game is also a final. Virginia Union defeated Fort Valley State by a score of 31-28. Virginia Union is still going on their tear. So congratulations to Virginia Union as they continue to roll up the victories this year. And also Shaw, as I said, defeated Elizabeth City by a score of 35-16. So guys, we're going to come back next week and we're going to talk about all of these scores and the impact that it's going to have throughout the rest of the season, and who we think will, based upon these first few games that have been played during the season, who we think will come out the victor in conference play, and whether or not these teams can hold up during the rest of the season. And with that being said, everyone, may God bless you, may God keep you, and whatever life throws at you, may God make sure he gives that victory to you, and that you are successful in everything that you do in life. And if you need to get your booster because of COVID-19, guys, please do. Don't play. Just don't play. Be safe. Be safe out there. And we will see you this upcoming week, and I will send out notice to let you know if we're coming out on Monday or if we're coming on later on during the week. But look forward to us coming out on Monday to discuss all of the scores for your favorite HBCU school. And we will come to you next week. God bless and have a good day.